Hello, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Can somebody confirm that I am audible? So nice to see everyone from so many different places, including some familiar faces like Dougie. Can you hear me okay? All righty. Thank you so much for confirming. Well, thank you again for joining us here today. I am William Nutt of Nutt Labs. We are an integrated digital strategy firm and Notion consultancy, typically based in New York, but currently based in North Carolina, where I grew up while we kind of ride out the coronavirus. And I also run the independent website Notion VIP, where I publish tools and insights about all things Notion. You can access that at notion.vip. So today we're going to explore how to manage your meetings in Notion. And if you joined the last edition at Notion at Work, we kind of hinted at what we'll be doing today. In the last edition, we built out a client portal where you could share information with your clients and collaborate with them in various ways. And if you missed that one, you can access it within Notion's YouTube channel. So today we're going to take a deeper dive into that brief look that we took at meeting management. And Notion really offers a powerful platform for managing meetings with your clients and internally. So among the benefits it offers is it allows you to define goals and outcomes for your meetings. It allows you to compose agendas to keep the meetings on topic. You can take rich interactive notes. You can share contextual information with attendees to reference before your meeting. You can assign and track follow-up deliverables to meeting attendees, and you can also easily access past and upcoming meetings through calendars and other helpful interfaces to stay organized and keep all of the information accessible. So if you've joined my editions of Notion at Work previously, or if you've explored any of my guides on Notion VIP, you've probably seen that my foremost recommendation when organizing a Notion workspace is to consolidate your information within master databases, and then to create gateways for gateways to that information through kind of helpful, refined perspectives, typically using linked databases. So that's the approach we're going to take today with this sort of meeting manager. We're going to create a master meeting database, and then we're going to create helpful ways of accessing those meetings through refined perspectives. So here's what we'll be doing. You can see on this kind of demo database, on this demo workspace for this fictitious company, Loggerhead Labs, that their home base page here has a list of meetings here. This is a filtered this is a linked database linking to the master meetings database. We're seeing it here as a list. We can also see it as a calendar. And when you click to open any of these meetings, you can see that it contains an abundance of helpful information that you can reference and utilize before meetings, during meetings, and after meetings. So this calendar contains all of the meetings within the database, but we can also open up. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm using the wrong screen, not the one that I'm sharing. Let me track back just a few seconds here. Okay, now we're on the home base for Loggerhead Labs. I apologize for that, and I'm glad I caught myself without going the entire duration of this webcast working in the wrong screen. So now we can see the calendar. This is a linked database that's linking to the master meetings database, and it contains all of the meetings within that master database. And we can open up any of the meetings to view that helpful information that I mentioned for reference before meetings, during meetings, and after meetings. And if we scroll up here, we have a list of clients that Loggerhead Labs would be working with, and we can open up one of those clients to see an abundance of helpful information specifically about the client. But as it pertains to our exercise today, we can see a filtered list of the meetings. So this is a linked database linking to the master meetings database, but it's filtered to show only the meetings for this client. So you can see these are sort of gateways into the master meetings database, and they're refined to be most helpful in their different contexts. So we're going to see exactly how these are created. And if you're curious about the way that this page is structured and the rest of this demo database is structured, it follows this sort of bulletproof workspace methodology that I've formulated based on some other productivity methodologies, primarily the PARA method. And I've published a lot of resources related to that in one edition of Notion at Work. I think it was our first, actually. It was about the intelligent workspace, which is the exact same thing as what I call the bulletproof workspace. So you can find that within Notion's YouTube channel. And on Notion VIP, you can find it at notion.vip/bulletproof if you're curious about that. So for this exercise we're going to do today, there's also a corresponding post on Notion VIP. And we'll link to that within the recording of this video, within the description of the recording of this webcast, that'll be available on YouTube probably tomorrow or shortly thereafter. But it's on Notion VIP, and it's called Supercharge Your Meetings with Notion. So as you practice some of these philosophies and methodologies that we explore on your own, you can reference this post as well. So let's jump into exactly how this works. So what we're going to do is we are going to create that master database. And it doesn't really matter where you save that master database. You can save it wherever it suits your workspace the best, because you're not really going to be accessing this master database directly. You're going to be accessing it through these helpful perspectives that I mentioned. So in the case of the bulletproof workspace approach, it would make sense to save the workspace maybe within the resources database, the master resources database. But for our sake today, what I'm going to do, I'm trying to go full screen on my shared screen. Yeah, I see you there, Anthony. Thank you. So hopefully you can see my shared screen here now at full screen. So what we're going to do here today is we're just going to create this new database at the highest level within the shared workspace pages. And so we can just call it meetings, and then we can make it a full page table. And so this table is going to have a handful of properties. And of course, you can create different properties based on the unique needs of your organization. But what we're going to do here today, these properties are going to be pretty universally applicable. So what I like to do is I like to rename the title property to label, because we're going to label each of these meetings with the unique sort of phrase that you can use as a helpful reference. And then we're going to rename the default tags property. We're going to rename it to format, and we're going to make it a select property. And what we're going to do with this select property is we're going to indicate the format of the meeting. So the format of the meeting, it could be in person, it could be a video conference, or it could be an old-fashioned call. So then we could take this default files property and make it a date property, because we're going to want to indicate when the meeting is scheduled. So we made it a date property, and let's just rename it when. And then finally, we want a location property. And the location, the format of it is really going to depend on the format of the meeting. So we'll just rename it. We'll name this property location, and we'll leave it as a text property. And one other note here is that I like to, unless there's a real reason to have different colors for the select options, such as, like a bright a red or a pink to indicate hot, and then like a cool green or blue to indicate something less urgent, or green to indicate complete, with red indicating incomplete. Variations of coloring like that. I typically just default to the default gray just to keep the aesthetic clean. So we have our 4 primary properties here that we'll be using for our meetings. Now, depending on your workspace, you might also add some relation properties that allow you to connect this database to other databases. So for example, if you have a client's database and you want to choose a client that corresponds with each meeting, you would use a relation property to do that. And so in the case of the bulletproof approach, or not even bulletproof, but just like a para approach, we have areas as a master database. And in this case, our clients are actually areas within that areas database. So I'm going to create a areas property here, and I'm going to make it a relation property, and I'm going to choose that areas database. And so what that's going to do is it's going to connect this database to the areas database and then allow me to choose any of the areas within that database. And as I said, we have clients saved as areas, so we can choose among the clients within that areas database. So here we've constructed our master meetings database. And the next step you're going to want to take is just to add a few meetings to work with. So as you're initially creating this database, you can add just kind of some dummy meetings, or you can actually begin to populate it with real meetings. So there's no reason to do that step by step slowly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the meetings that I have from the pre-populated database and paste them in here. And we'll just take a look at kind of how they're structured. So I prefer to unwrap my cells to keep the aesthetic kind of manageable to look at, unless there's a particular reason to keep them wrapped. So I just untoggled the wrapping option. So for the label, what I like to do is this, following best practices, the label is going to need to be unique for each item in the database. And it's also going to need to represent what makes the meeting unique. You're going to need to be able to identify what the meeting is based on the label. So my kind of formula for that is I'll have a description followed by the date of the meeting, because the date is generally going to ensure that the value is unique. So I have a series of all staff meetings. They recur each Monday. So I have just, for that label on those recurring meetings, I have weekly all staff followed by the date of it. And I know that if you don't already know, you're likely wondering, how can we automate the recurrence of meetings like we do on Google Calendar and other calendaring tools? Notion doesn't currently offer the ability to do that. There are some kind of workarounds, some kind of strategies to make it really easy to do manually. What I like to do is, if you have any sort of savvy with Google Sheets, you can create, if you have a weekly meeting, you can go ahead and create 52 of them. You can create enough for the whole year. And then with Google Sheets, you have the ability to just fill down the date. So the date will, increment by 7 days for each iteration of the meeting. And then you can have the label automatically generated according to, different criteria, different properties. And that may sound complicated, but if you've worked with Google Sheets, it's actually pretty simple. And then Google Sheets copies and pastes really easily into these Notion tables, so long as the properties line up. So that's my recommendation for recurring meetings, is just to create enough to fill a quarter, or enough to fill even a year at a time. So we have those weekly all staff meetings are in person, but we also have recurring Sweet Green Team check-ins, which are video conferences. You can see for each of these, we've used this format property, which we've pre-populated with the select options, and to indicate, the format of each of these meetings. And no calls in my dummy data because in this age of coronavirus, I'm not having a lot of calls, certainly not having a lot of in-persons, but having a lot of video conferences for sure. So that's the label property, the format property. And then of course we have the date assigned to each of these meetings. And for each of those dates, we have a time. And in the case of like this quarterly on-site meeting, that time has an end time associated with it as well. So where applicable, you can include an end time. And then the location, this is just our text property. The format varies based on the format of the meeting. So in the case of these in-person staff meetings, we have the room specified. For the video conferences, we have Google Meet links. At the quarterly on-site, we have the address of the office. So the location and the format of the location is really going to vary based on the format of the meeting. And then finally, we have the area associated with each of the meeting. In most cases, that's going to be the client. But in the case of the staff meeting, we call that Loggerhead Life. That's kind of like the label for HR or all staff communications. That's the area that those all staff meetings fall under. So these are our pre-populated meetings, and you can see kind of how they're structured. So as we saw, these meetings are going to have an abundance of helpful information within the inner page content. So let's take another quick look at that one we saw previously. Most of your meetings, and this may be overkill for some of your simpler meetings, but for the most part, you might like to have features like defining the purpose of the meeting or defining an intended outcome or the goal of the meeting. You might include a list of resources to reference before the meeting, to circulate among attendees to get familiar with before the meeting, and then you can reference them during the meeting. Meetings are most productive when they have an agenda. And then you can have an area to take notes. And then finally, you can assign action items and assign them to attendees to complete after the meeting. So rather than populating each of these sections independently for each new meeting, what we want to do is create a template, a meeting template. So we're going to do that by going up to our new button here and clicking on the arrow and choosing new template. So we can just name our template meeting and then come down into the page content and create those sections that I just described. So the first one was purpose, and that could be goals, it could be intended outcomes, whatever you want it to be. But I like to use a heading 2 for these section headings and then underline them with the divider block. And then the other one was resources. So we'll do the same for resources, add a divider block. And the way that you'll add content to the purpose section and the resources section, it works well to have them arranged as columns. So I'm going to arrange those two as columns. And then we had that agenda database. So this is going to be a new database, not a linked database, but we'll add an inline table for this and name it agenda. So for the agenda, we're going to generally want 3 different properties. We can rename the title property to the agenda topic. And then we can rename the default tags property to minutes, or it could be duration. And I like to make that a number property because it just gives a little bit of flexibility if the schedule changes at all. This could also be a date property with a specific time assigned to it. But if your meeting starts late or is pushed to a different day, then it can be a pain to update those times. So it's easier just to assign a duration in minutes here. And then finally, you might want to have to indicate the person who's going to kind of lead the topic in the meeting. So I call that leader. That can be a person property if you're going to be choosing people who are members and guests of your workspace. But if they're not going to be members or guests of your workspace, you could just make that a text property and enter the name of the person who will be leading the session. And then we want an area where we can take notes. If you have a section for note taking that attendees are going to be referencing after the meeting, it might be helpful to assign a dedicated notes taker to each meeting, or you could have a notes aggregator where everyone kind of circulates their notes and then the aggregator compiles them in a clean way. And then lastly, we have our action items database, or you could call it deliverables. And these are the action items that are kind of outcomes from the conversation where attendees are assigned deliverables. So we can rename the title property to deliverable, and then we can change the default tags property to the person responsible. Again, that could be a person property or just a text property, depending on whether you're working with members and guests of your workspace. And then you can rename the default files property to the deadline of the deliverable and change that to a date. So this is the framework that we're going to want to apply to each new meeting. We've created it within a template that will allow us to utilize it for each new meeting really quickly. Now, you might want to have a separate template for each type of meeting. We've just created a generic meeting template, but if you have a recurring like client meeting, for example, and it's going to have the same attendees each time, you could have an attendees section that's pre-populated with those recurring attendees, and you could use that template specific for those meetings and other templates for other meetings. But we're just creating one here. Creating other ones, you would follow the exact same approach. So having created that template, for existing meetings that you've already added here, you can open any of them. And we now have this meeting option listed within our template. So we can click that, and there our framework is automatically populated. So for meetings that have not been added yet, we could click on this arrow under new here again, and that meeting option is there. So we can click on that, and that's going to allow us to create a brand new meeting. So I am going to delete this one to keep us clean. So having created our meetings database here, again, we're not going to be accessing this database directly very often. Instead, we're going to have those nice refined gateways to it. And those gateways will exist in different places based on the way that you've organized your workspace. But as we saw, we have one here on the home page of the Loggerhead Labs workspace, and the default view is the calendar. So let's just quickly recreate this calendar view. This calendar is a linked database that links to that master meetings database. So rather than creating a new database, we are going to create a linked database block, and we're going to choose our meetings database. So here is our meetings database, just as we were just working on it. And so we want to create a view of this meetings database that displays it in the calendar format. So what we'll do is we'll add a view, we'll call it calendar, and we'll choose calendar. So now we're seeing all of our meetings as a calendar. And you can see all of the meetings here. We haven't filtered out any of them, and we can see their name and we can see their time. But in this case, it might be helpful to see the area that we've associated with each one. In most cases, that's going to be, as I've mentioned, the client. So what we can do is we can click on our three-dotted menu up here, choose properties, and toggle on area. So now we can see that the client is indicated with each meeting, or in the case of our all staff meeting, it's that loggerhead life. And we can open up any of our meetings to see all of that helpful content. In this case, this one's already pre-populated with an agenda and with action items for demonstration. Also some dummy resources and some lorem ipsum for the purpose. So this calendar view works well as a default on the homepage. It looks nice, but sometimes meetings are helpfully displayed as lists as well. So we could just duplicate this calendar view and then go and edit the name, call it a list, and choose the list format for it. And that is going to display all of these items as a list. And once again, we can choose to display the area along with these items for helpful reference. And we might want to change the order that these properties are displayed. So this is a nice list view that's helpful as well. When we do that, we can probably delete the default view, leaving us with just our nice calendar and our nice list. So this is a helpful way to display all the meetings, but as we saw, it can be helpful to view filtered versions of the list, such as if you're looking at a specific project or a specific client or another area within your organization. So if we open that sweet green client, again, we can see all of the meetings associated specifically with this client. So I'm not going to recreate this linked database again. It would be the exact same process as we did for the homepage calendar, but the only difference is that we've added a filter, and we've filtered this list for meetings where the area, remember that relation property, contains the sweet green client. And therefore, we see only the meetings that that will be held with or about that sweet green client. So obviously, you could create these refined views of your meetings in a variety of different ways, depending on how your workspace is considered, is configured. You just want to create these views within context where they can be most helpful. So that basically concludes our demonstrations of these gateways to your master meetings database. And then the last note I just want to make here is that there's a few different ways that you can share these views of your databases. So if it's with your internal staff, members of the database, of the workspace, obviously they're going to be working directly with this homepage so they can see all the meetings here. They'll probably, for the relevant team members will probably be working directly within the sweet green client, these project or area clients where they can see those filtered views. For outsiders, you can link to these full views. You can open the view as a full page, and then within the three dots, you can copy the link to the view. You just want to make sure if they haven't already been granted access to it as a guest that they have appropriate access or that it's public. And we have a whole other segments on sharing and permissions. If you have any questions about that, you might consult those, and you can always tweet at me with any questions. But then you can also circulate links to specific meetings. So if you're emailing the team in advance, the attendees in advance, and you want to say, hey, be sure to review all of the resources beforehand, you can come to share and copy the page link and include that in the email, and just be sure that everyone has the appropriate permissions to access it. So that is configuring this kind of really useful method of managing meetings with Notion. And as I said, there's this complimentary post on Notion VIP that you can follow as you practice some of this on your own. This webcast recording will be available on YouTube, and you can always tweet at me with any questions. And we are right at 2:30, but I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have now. And we have just a few minutes, and we can certainly continue the conversation in the various Notion communities once we conclude here today. So I am going to look at the Ask a Question feature within Crowdcast. If you're streaming on YouTube, there should be a Crowdcast link within the description, but that's where I'll be taking these questions. So let's start with, are you recording the webinar, by the way? I'd love to share it with my colleagues afterwards. So thank you. And I that was probably an early question because I mentioned a few times that we'll have this recording posted to Notion's YouTube channel. So yes, absolutely. This is being recorded. You can watch it at your own pace, stop it, start it, and share it with whomever you'd like. And feel free to include that Notion VIP text post along with it, because that'll probably be helpful. Homesick Mac, welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you. We've missed a larger part of the intro when you were showing the structure in Notion, all due to small screen estate. Please run through it very fast if we have time. I think that I may have caught myself and redone that. If there's anything in particular that you'd like for me to review, throw it in the chat, and I'll go back. Through it here quickly. And again, I'm excited to continue the conversation once we wrap up here today, too, on Twitter and elsewhere. So if I make updates to a template, will that update to all templates or only new uses of the template? Excellent, excellent question. Unfortunately, I have to say that existing uses of the template will not be affected by updates. So keep that in mind as you implement your templates. However, some good news, Notion just yesterday released a powerful new feature to templates. And it's kind of something you may need to get your hands on in order to really comprehend. But if you include a linked database in a template, our templates today were original databases. They were not linked databases. But if you include a linked database in a template, and it's related to another database, then you can filter by that related property and filter by the template, so that new instances of the template, new items that are created with the template, will be that filter for the related database. That, I'm sure, makes absolutely no sense just speaking aloud, but there's been a lot of conversation about it in the various Notion communities. So dig into that because it is exciting, and there's some good examples out there for you to find too. So to answer your question, I hope you're not too bummed that updates to templates do not update their existing instances, but that update is pretty terrific. So hopefully you can play with that. All right. Anthony, got you on the recording. I've dropped a request using Ask a Question. Okay, so I'm just looking over the chat here. So Homesick Mac, there you are. I believe you showed the whole company structure and then the meetings database, all that prior to doing everything from scratch. So Homesick Mac, we're just focused on the meetings database. The way that I've structured the whole company is really a whole different segment. That gets back to kind of the bulletproof approach. If you want to look at that structure, you can go back to on the Notion YouTube channel, look for one of the earliest episodes of Notion at Work. It's called Building an Intelligent Workspace or something along those lines. That addresses the wider structure more comprehensively for you. And then there's also that post on notion.vip/bulletproof that covers it all as well. All righty. So yeah, today we were just focused on these meeting structures. So I think that addresses all of the questions in question and answer, as well as okay, a few more here. I'll answer just a couple more. Would you know if any specific Google Calendar integration or any auto trigger that could create a meeting that could populate your setup here? So great question. That's going to transform meetings in Notion for sure. Right now, that's not a possibility. Integrating Google Calendar with Notion, that's going to be a benefit of the forthcoming API that Notion is actively working on, highly anticipated. We have senses that it's getting closer to its release. What an API means is that it allows Notion to communicate with other tools. And I think one of the biggest early uses of that API is going to be integration with Google Calendar. So not currently a possibility, but hopefully right around the corner. It'll be pretty easily for you. One more question. With this application usage, did you use any part of Para to do it? So yes, anytime I referenced an area, when we were looking at the configuration, Ebert, that was drawn directly from Para. If you're familiar with Para, you know that areas is a big pillar of that structure. And so when we related our meetings database to the areas database, that was drawn directly from Para. And as I mentioned, the clients are saved as areas in our configuration. All right, I'm going to take, I think, can you talk briefly about how you'd add a master to-do list to the meetings data, to the meeting template? So what we do there, that's a great question, Jenna, and that really gets to that feature that was released yesterday that I mentioned. So if you have a master to-do list, if you have a master tasks database, and I unfortunately I don't have time to explain this now, but if you follow up with me on Twitter or in the Facebook community or on Reddit, I'll create a demonstration for you. But if you have a master tasks database within the meeting template, what you can do is you can create a linked database. And that linked database, you can link it to your master tasks database. And then you can filter that tasks database by that template. And what that's going to do with this new feature that Notion released yesterday is for that any task that you relate to that meeting or meetings that you create with that template, it's going to automatically filter that related database, that list of tasks, by that particular meeting. So I hope that kind of makes sense, but that's how you do it. Hopefully that'll get you on the right path, and then you can tinker with it or follow up with me, and I'll show you exactly how to do it. But the general approach is to add a related database that links to your master tasks database, and then to filter by the template that you create. And that's going to create a linked view for each meeting. Okay, Anthony is asking about CRMs. That is also another topic. There are a few examples of CRM templates out there that you can find. I believe the wonderful Marie Poland has published a few, and then on Notion's official directory of templates, there's a handful there as well. And that is in the pipeline for a Notion at Work episode as well. So please be sure to keep an eye out for that one. We'll be covering the use of Notion as a CRM, and that is going to be also a big beneficiary of the API, is the ability to tap into other tools in order to keep your Notion CRM in sync with other contacts databases, existing CRMs, or even your G Suite contact list and all that jazz. So that'll be coming with the API. But right now, Notion still makes a fabulous tool as a CRM, and I would definitely go ahead and get a head start on it, and then you can just bolster it even further once that API launches. So that's going to wrap it up today. Thank you so much for joining us here, for your engagement. These are really, really great questions. I do want to see more of them in our various online communities. It's so much fun to, one of the biggest benefits of Notion is its robust user community and communities of experts. So I look forward to seeing you there on Twitter, and check out those resources on Notion VIP, and stay safe and healthy until we reconvene here. Bye-bye.